more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome, everyone, as I wear my headsets and tuck into the desk here to deliver with Jeremy Storton, my partner in beer crime, for A Sense of Beer Style, an amazing show that we're about to do on Alt Bier. And now I have to crack one while I'm talking, which is actually a classic example. And I remember for the first time I had an Alt Bier, which it wasn't the actual commercial example, but Zoom Alt Sticky is a stronger version of Alt Bier, but it blew my mind. Now let me go ahead and try to properly pour this. And this is maybe lighter than some would expect, but it is a classic example. Also happens to be certified organic, which is fun. Yeah. So we're talking about Alt Bier, part of the Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines in the Amber Bitter European category. And we've got a cold conditioned, that would mostly mean lager, but it doesn't in this case. It's cold conditioned top fermenting beer. So it's an ale, believe it or not. Just think alt means ale, but they condition it cold. And it's from the Dusseldorf region in Germany that really emphasized and became known for these style of beers. Alt, by the way, refers to old. So my beer's not old. It's fresh from the fridge. But old means the old style of brewing, right? Meaning using ale yeast before they were using lager yeast. Go figure. And then we had brewers that came along and advanced things to really isolate and get us to the lagers. But before there were lagers, there were ales. So overall impression, it's very palatable and moderately colored, as you can see. We're going to talk all about that and the mouthfeel and the flavor. And I just want you all to know that this should be a beer style on your list to seek out, serve, sell, brew, try, and go forth. Jeremy, what are the typical ingredients that take us to this incredible beer?
So this is kind of a fun thing. Whenever I talk about beer, I always talk about, you have ales, you have lagers, and then you have hybrids. This is one of those hybrids. And so there isn't a set ingredient list for this. It's typically a Pilsen Munich base, but you can use a little bit of crystal malt, a little bit of chocolate malt or black malts just for color. And your example, which appears to be very pale, probably did not get that judicious treatment of any chocolate or black malts for that. But I can't wait to hear what it tastes like. You can use a little bit of wheat or even some roasted wheat to bring that as well. So this is a little bit further up in the north and kind of caters back to the Hanseatic League. So it didn't originally follow the Reinheitsgebot as strictly as it first did. So you can use a little bit of wheat. But you can expect the noble hops. That's kind of where the pattern follows. They're using noble hops is what they had, especially the Spalt variety. They're going to use a very attenuative an ale yeast. And again, this is just where it's really fun. It's an ale yeast, but they usually ferment it at cool for ale temperatures. And ales, for anyone who doesn't really know, I mean, that could be anywhere from, upper 60s to even higher, especially when it comes to Belgian type stuff. I imagine that we're gonna to ferment this at low 60s, maybe upper 50s, and that's Fahrenheit, of course. And that's going to help kind of restrain the ester production. So it is going to have a little bit more of a clean profile. But the way that they brew that, they're also going to use either a step mash or a decoction mash to really bring out the elegance and that richness of the malt flavors as well. But again, this is a hybrid because they're using an ale yeast at cooler temps, and so it kind of flips what we expect it to be afterwards. But you have your beer in front of you, Julia. So for those who can't see it, what do you expect, or what is a typical appearance for an alt beer?
So I'm going to call what I'm drinking with the pincus as a outlier on the color, right? It is
Hmm.
Munster Alt for sure, but the style guidelines are going to call for amber to deep copper. This is certainly darker than gold, right? It is darker than gold,
Yep.
but I'm not getting fully to amber nor at all or getting to copper in any way.
Sure.
Brilliant clarity though, so it's backing it up there. It looks a little cloudy in my glass because of the quality of my camera. But you can see my face through that, Jeremy, and that
Yep.
means brilliant quality. That's a good test. You want to see if something's clear? What does that mean? Can you see your friend's
Can
face through
can
that
you see
glass?
Julia's face through the glass? That's brilliant.
Exactly. That's a true test. So it's backing it up there. So ultra brilliant clarity, and then thick, creamy, long lasting, off white collar of foam. I'm going to say it's almost all of that. It's certainly long lasting and thick and creamy, but it's very white here instead of that tan. The reason the style guidelines would say long lasting off white collar of foam is because it's in many other versions of these alts. They're using those other ingredients to the malt to bring you to darker colors.
Hmm.
So that would influence the head for sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's mostly there. And what about the aroma?
The aroma, this is one of my favorite beers. I've got a million favorite beers, but I love this beer because of all those different ingredients that they can use, and in varying levels. There's no kind of set rules or guidelines of who does what with this ingredient per se. So every different alt beer is going to be a bit different, but you can expect it is going to be a pretty dominant malt driven beer, but it's also going to be kind of a dominant hoppy beer too. And we'll talk about that when we get to the stats. But you can expect a kind of a medium to medium high, rich malty beer. Uh, Common flavors I expect would be some like baked bread, nuts, toasty bread crusts, and depending on how much of the crystal malts or caramel malts that you use, you can get different esters to bring in some different flavor. And you could get just like subtle little hints of dried fruit or raisins, but it really depends on that ingredient list. But one thing it shouldn't really be is it shouldn't be roasty or burnt or dark chocolatey flavor. That would be a little outside the norm. Again, you can expect the noble hops, but the flavor of those hops are going to come through kind of low to medium as far as the flavor is concerned. And we'll talk about the bitterness as opposed to the flavor in just a minute. Um, but like I said, you can have low to medium low esters, and you should expect clean fermentation. It is an ale yeast. It is going to kick off some esters, especially in the aroma and the flavor, of course, but it's going to be relatively clean because remember, we're fermenting this at a cool temperature to suppress that stuff. But that's what you can expect in the aroma. Now let's see what it would taste like. What is the flavor when we start putting all these things together?
And so much of flavor falls and comes together from the aroma. So you've led into a lot
Yeah.
of it. And with the emphasis and the guidelines, it leads with assertive medium to high hop bitterness. And I'm going to say a range, and we will talk about stats in a moment, but 25 to 50 bitterness units.
Yeah.
My example is on the much lower scale. I mean, maybe 25 at best. So this is not a bitter facing example of alt, but it can be more aggressive in the bitterness. That's a broad range. You go to 50, you're getting very assertive. And then the malty flavors, to me, in this example particularly, and most, you're going to have Pilsner malt as that backdrop. And this is carrying the day in my example. And then you sneak in a little bit of Munich malt for that color, that toasted essence. So you're going to look for that in varying degrees. The beer is going to finish drier, medium to dry. And then you're supposed to get a lingering bitter aftertaste. And then, you're not getting too much esters, but I'm getting a little bit, and Jeremy mentioned that because this is an ale, it almost goes to low level unripe raspberries, unripe
Mm.
strawberries. I'm getting esters. Esters are, if you have not studied up, a byproduct of yeast fermentation. The ale yeast that you cerveza, so many of the beers, and we'll go to a prep episode, but cerevisier yeast, right? Different types of it will give you esters. And so I'm getting that low level unripe raspberries. And then we're not getting roast, we're not getting harshness. Clean fermentation profile is what you're after, minus those esters. And then, medium low spicy, peppery, or floral flavor. That's a common descriptor for when you have European continental hops. And I'm getting very, very low levels of those hops when I taste and smell. And then you can have some water influence based on where Dusseldorf is in Germany. You have a mineral component, so you can get a light minerality, almost low-level chalky from the water there, but that's not as common. And in this example, I'm not getting any of that. So what about mouthfeel, Jeremy?
So mouthfeel, one of the things I love about this beer is I used to, early on, before I knew anything about beer, I always thought that German beers were pale and bitter and light bodied, and I had no idea what I was thinking about, because this is very medium bodied beer. Typically, this because of the ingredients, especially the crystal malt and that minerality that you just mentioned, it's going to give a little bit of a body. And so it's perfectly normal to have it, square right in the middle of medium body. It should have a feeling of smoothness on your palate. It can be kind of a medium to moderately high carbonation too. So you have this wonderful prickle that you can use to your advantage. And we should not have hardly any astringency, 0 to low, if any. But because this is a very elegant, kind of strong malt with a hop bitterness backbone to match it, but you shouldn't have any of these flavors that would kind of take you out of the game. And so that's where the mouthfeel really comes in. But speaking of that, is what other beers would kind of be similar to this? What are some of the styles that we can compare this to?
So it's almost like a stepping stone where you're going from Vienna lager, which branched off, frankly, from the German lagers that it was inspired. And now when you get to alt, meaning old, right, it really was the ale style established type of beer that, believe it or not, is more bitter and drier than a Vienna lager and a little bit richer. So you're stepping up from that Vienna lager. It's stepping down when you think about a Dunkelsbach. Dunkels meaning dark Bach beer. It's less alcohol, less malty and rich, and more bitterness. So the bitterness in that 25 to 50 BU range that we mentioned is a real factor in this, comparing it to other styles. A lot of people would bring up California Commons, so do the style guidelines. That's a really different style to talk about. There's an essence of woody hops that we can educate anyone that hasn't heard of California Common or had it on. So that's devoid here. There's none of that. But you could put that to in a testing situation of, okay, tell me what a California Common is. Tell me what an Alt Bier is. And some people might have a harder time figuring that out. And then bottom line is it's more bitter and malty than an international amber lager. It's just that step up, but it's also in a class by itself. Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of styles to compare it to, right?
Well, and I would agree with you too that they compare it to the California Common, but the California Common's got a lager yeast at ale temps, and the Alt Bier's got ale yeast at lager temps. And different hop profiles, so it really doesn't match up well. However, where it does come in is that flavor differentiation, and I think it's paramount for anyone who needs to study this, needs to know this. You have to taste those side by side and get to know them intimately, because they can be a good stand-in for each other, and that's a tough call to make. But that's talking about the style comparison. I have the unfortunate duty of doing my best to pronounce these names, and I know I'm going to destroy them, so please forgive me. But anytime if you find a beer, especially from Dusseldorf, it's not quite an appellation like Kolsch is, but you're going to these are centered from Dusseldorf. But if you find Alt, A-L-T, that is most likely going to be an Alt Bier. If you see Alt Stick, S-T-I-C-K-E, that's a strong Alt Bier, or a Doppelstick. That's a a double strong Alt Bier. But you can find them in the breweries from Dusseldorf. So Bolton, Schlosser, and Diebels. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. But one that I found and I've fallen in love with is the Zum Uriga. That's my best pronunciation for that. These are harder to find, especially from Dusseldorf. But another one that's not on this list, and it's not a true alt beer, but a good example of a variation that a craft brewery has done a great job with, would be Alaskan Amber. And those are pretty easy to find. So if you want to kind of dip your toes into the alt beer world, that's a great beer. So we could definitely go find one of those.
I love, I'm going to jump in, and I love that you
Yeah.
brought up Alaskan Amber because it doesn't get enough due.
Oh,
Uh,
so good.
my understanding for Alaskan Amber is it might be lager fermented, meaning with lager yeast. I'll need to check on that, and certainly anyone listening can kind of help inform us of that. I'll also back up Jeremy's, the sticky, right? The Doppelsticky beers, they are stronger, richer. And
Mm-hmm.
that is in the Zoom Ugg, which Jeremy is referring to. It has a very tall neck of a bottle,
Mm-hmm.
blow your socks off type of
So
beer,
good.
but much more aggressive in ethanol, alcohol, and girth and residual sugar and final gravity. Those are more, as according to the BJCP guidelines, for historical beer styles instead. It's a whole nother category for those
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah, but I brought those up because you might see those in contrast to each other, and I don't want
Totally
someone to
makes
go out
sense.
there and see alt. What's this alt stick? Oh, I have no idea. Well, they're relatives. They're the big siblings of the alt beer that we're talking about today. But I believe you started down this road. We need to talk about the vital stats.
Yeah, so Alt Bier for vital statistics. We do start with original gravity just for study purposes, and it helps give an indication of alcohol level. Is 1044 to 1052. That's a very medium to low grade original gravity. So you're not going to have a big beer. And frankly, the final gravity is more of the story here. At 1008, that's going to mean drier. To 1014 means certainly some residual sugar. So a
Mm-hmm.
broad range that doesn't tell you enough, you will get a spectrum of examples is the point of that range. And then so our ABV is 4.3 to 5.5% alcohol by volume. Very approachable, very sessionable in my view. And then that bitterness units that we mentioned, or I mentioned earlier in the show, is 25 bitterness units to 50 bitterness units. So a big spectrum there as well. And then the SRM, where my beer is getting schooled on that, but it's okay, is really 9. So that amber level all the way up to 17, which is taking you almost beg to bring up the word brown
Yep,
in
knocking
the
on that door.
color. And this is just shy of 7 SRM maybe at best. So that's okay, but those guidelines for alt 9 to 17 tell you where things might land, and
Yeah.
it's super good to dial in and drill down on those. So what about glassware and temperature, Jeremy? Take us through that.
Well, I want to bring up something that I think is important here, especially for if you're studying this. When I was studying for Advanced Cicerone, I lined up all of the different beer styles visually. I'm a visual learner. Let's just call it what it is. And when you look at the beer styles, particularly from Germany, for the most part, all the ABVs are really close to each other. The IBUs are really close to each other. All that stuff kind of stacks up. But alt beer, if you look at all the German beers, this is potentially the most bitter of all the German beers with a top side of 50 IBUs. The only thing that comes close to it would be a Czech Pale at 45 or a German Pils at 40. But when you start looking at the clues to see how they kind of fit in relation to each other, the alt beer is pretty memorable when it comes to trying to study it and lock down some of this information. And that was one way that I was able to kind of keep alt beer at the forefront of my mind, because it did stand out in a really interesting way. And one of the other ways that it stands out is the glassware between Cologne and the Kolsch's from Cologne and the alt beers from Dusseldorf. They're kind of, and I'll show this. This is not a true example, but it is almost like like a highball glass or a Stange, and especially for Kolsch's. However, the alt beer, they still use a glass similar to a chimney or a highball or a Kolsch Stange, but they tend to be a little bit shorter, a little bit fatter, and they may or may not, but I've heard oftentimes they're going to have like a little foot at the end of it too. So glassware, if you go to Dusseldorf, you can expect that particular glassware. If you're going to a good bar that has great German beer. If they poured in anything different, it's just something to note, because all it's important is you get to drink that beer. But that is the glass that you can, that is, I'm going to say, supposed to go with an alt beer.
Yeah, and it's so fun that you're able to showcase that one. I've got some in my glassware cabinet as well, and that Kolsch style glass with the different shape, and this one Jeremy said is not as tall. It is a perfect glass, and it's indicative of getting a alt beer in Dusseldorf. That's what they're going to serve it to you in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just nature.
And the great thing about that glass is it's not a lot of volume of beer. And for those of you who are listening or watching this, you might think, what are you talking about? The nice thing is they keep on bringing them to you. They're always fresh. They're always cold. It's like you're doing big beer shots. And so you have 3 or 4 of those, and you're not in a state of overconsumption because they're small. And there's a kind of a beauty to that.
There is a beauty. It slows down your consumption, and it's the
Yeah.
polar opposite in Germany and many places, frankly, in northern Germany,
Yeah.
where you're drinking half-liter or liter steins, right?
Yeah.
And this is hey, we're going to sip these, serve you a new fresh pour. It's going to have the crisp carbonation that didn't volatilize out 10 minutes into that liter. So I really love that dichotomy of sizes of glassware served in different areas or used in different areas in Germany.
Absolutely. So now our favorite part, we get to talk about what we're going to pair with this, right?
Yeah, and so I would take this beer and not too aggressive cheeses. Emmental is a good example. This beer is very nuanced. It will get washed away by a lot of more rich style dishes. I mean, lightly steamed pork comes to mind, not too aggressive, right? Spätzle and some types of a little bit of pasta. That's the backdrop for flavor anyway, because pastas and starches are a backdrop for whatever flavor you serve around it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what comes to mind. How about you, Jeremy?
Well, you stole my Spätzle idea. I was definitely going to have some Spätzle and some kind of like beef rib meat to go along with that Spätzle with this beer. I think if we were to keep this beer kind of at home with some food coming from that home, I think a kind of a nice warmed up raclette cheese that is just starting to sweat a little bit and has just this beautiful alpine kind of, it's just beautiful. This would be so wonderful, especially with that kind of a little bit more pronounced bitterness, but with that malt backbone, what could really create a really beautiful kind of pairing. And I think that would be just absolute fun. But, honestly, I would love to have this with an Italian ossobuco as well. That would just be fantastic with all that kind of caramel estery flavors, and that bitterness would kind of really bring out that sweet acidity from the tomatoes and all the other meat that you get, all the other flavors you get from the ossobuco.
Yes, very possibly a home run pairing. I'll have to try it.
Yes.
And there you have it, friends. That is Alt Bier from your friends Julia and Jeremy at A Sense of Beer Style. Cheers to you all.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.